So, 1 month ago I made a video exposing the lies from Bioware, specifically Dragon Age Veilguard's very own director, saying that inclusivity was at the heart of the character creator. It was supposedly very important for them to make sure that everyone would feel represented by it. In the video I take this idea apart and I explain not only why it is objectively non-inclusive to the vast majority of players, but also went into the types of arguments used by the people who defended it, and a bit of the illusion as to why these things are so blindly supported by the masses. Do give it a watch if you haven't yet. Some bits of this video will rely on context from that video, in order for me to not repeat myself too much and make this video overly long. To make sure I covered some extra bases, I also went ahead and made a video replying to some of the comments from that video, presenting counter-arguments, misrepresentations, and even an insult or two. Ever since the release of that first video, things have not gotten much better for Veilguard. In fact, they have gotten so much worse that not only has my last shred of hope and positivity for this game all but vanished, but I'm also kind of pissed, to be honest. First, because of the surface level choices reflected by the footage that we've seen of the game so far. Second, because of how much worse they actually are, revealed by a playtester. And lastly, because of once again having arrogant, hateful developers insulting their fanbases with disgusting insults, baseless assumptions, and unhinged demonizations. Just more of the classic, arrogant, us versus them kind of attitude. Especially from Gaider, a former lead writer from Bioware, who, by the end of this video, is going to end up looking like a hypocritical clown whose word is worth nothing. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go piece by piece, building a case as to why these developers insulting us and defending their slop are inexcusably wrong. And we're also going to be trying to figure out exactly who is this game being made for. The shaky history of Dragon Age's legacy. One of the arguments you will find from the developers and fans of Dragon Age in their chambers of copium is that each time a new Dragon Age is announced, the fandom comes together to bash on the new game and praise the previous one. One of them even specifically mentions how rage baiters are suddenly in love with Dragon Age 2 and that we cannot imagine their surprise when Inquisition started its marketing and suddenly Dragon Age 2 had fans. They are not entirely wrong in their statements. The problem is that they are interpreting their meaning and their lessons in the worst way possible. Obviously, each individual Dragon Age had a dedicated fanbase so far. If it wasn't the case, if indeed Dragon Age 2 didn't have any fans, this franchise probably would have died with it. There's also something to be said for changing some aspects of the formula, such as Dragon Age 2, and a game almost completely rebooting everything that has ever been identifiable with Dragon Age, such as Veilguard. One may be harshly criticized for taking away things that people liked in the original, as they made a first sequel not exactly knowing what to do. But when you're 4 games into the series, and you're changing so much of its identity, not just as a series but as a game, then that makes this comparison from the developers be even stupider, but more on that later. But yes, there is an aspect in which Dragon Age has always had a very shaky history. It is a series that has always had its identity as a series up for question. Dragon Age 2 changed quite a bit of things from Dragon Age Origins. The art style and structure were quite different. There were also some design decisions, some that were good, such as the look of the Qunari, and some that were questionable, like the elves. All in all, hardcore fans of Origins were still very much taken aback by the shift in the overall vibe, but one would still be totally nuts to consider Dragon Age 2 a failure, or a dead game in terms of its fandom, especially because it did actually manage to grab some new fans, which is a normal thing anytime that there is a sequel to anything. To some extent, even though the atmosphere and the themes of Dragon Age 2 had a totally different vibe from Origins, it was still a Dragon Age game. Then Dragon Age Inquisition comes along and once again there is another shift in the art style and the structure. Now it was a more open world game. Not necessarily open world, but with open areas to explore, gather materials, fight enemies, fight dragons, find some side quests, etc. This time the shift brought things a little bit closer to Origins, but still clearly not with the intent of returning to its darker roots. It's still very colorful and warm, but at least things weren't as stylized anymore. There was a heavy emphasis in the in-world politics and conflicts between mages and Templars, and an impending doomsday threat looming overhead. However, the color scheme was still much more vibrant, and while some sections invoked seriousness, things never got to the point of the more gritty and dark fantasy-driven atmosphere that some fans from Origins were still wanting a return to. Regardless, one thing that cannot be said for Dragon Age 2 is that Inquisition was actually quite successful. It won several Game of the Year awards, including the one from the Game Awards itself, and it sold like hotcakes. It brought a lot of new fans into the series, myself included. So indulge me for a moment and answer me this. If you were presented with a situation where you release a first game and it's very successful and liked, and then you release a second one where you stray from the essence of that first one and it is not as successful or liked, and then you release a third one, somewhat splitting the difference between both extremes, and it is very successful, and at the very least, to be charitable to both its lovers and haters here, pretty well enjoyed, then what would you do for your next game in the series? Personally, I would either go even closer to that first game's essence and return to its roots, so to speak, or I would stay exactly where Inquisition was and not make any changes that would push the game further away from that essence of Origins or from that middle ground between the two. Instead, the developers just use this tumultuous history of Dragon Age as a fucking cover for their incompetence and stupidity. Like, what do they think that they're doing here by having this copium chamber discussion that basically sums itself up to, well, screw it, our fanbase has never liked our decisions, so let's just learn nothing from 3 games worth of data and let's just keep making or defending and even praising increasingly stupider decisions. Like, I'm sorry, but is this the type of people that are ahead of multi-million-dollar franchises? It's no wonder the Western games industry is fucked. On one hand, we have the DEI injecting activists in DEI departments or consulting companies, and on the other hand, we have egotistical morons who prefer to wallow in their failures, justifying them by blaming their fanbases, instead of taking action, learning from their mistakes, and trying to do better. There is this mentality that was exposed in Mass Effect Andromeda's report by Jason Schreier back when he was an actual gaming journalist that investigated things deeply. The name of the concept of the mentality was called Bioware magic, which basically came down to a complete lack of responsibility and cohesive management during development. Just keep cranking it until it's done, and by the end, through Bioware magic, everything will come together perfectly and everything will be fine. I think we can see a bit of that concept right here in these comments. A total lack of accountability for their mistakes, a lack of responsibility for their work, and now, as is fashionable in current day, a total dismissive and disrespectful disregard for their fans. Bioware magic didn't help Andromeda, and it didn't help Anthem. And now that this company has been stripped to its bones and even replaced with developers from Maxis who have spent the last decades making Sims games, including the director of Veilguard, Bioware magic will sure as shit not help it either. So now that we shortly established the tumultuous history of Dragon Age as a series, struggling to solidify a permanent identity despite the countless opportunities for BioWare to do so, let's talk about the insanely moronic path that Dragon Age Veilguard has decided to go down, despite the insane amount of data that they have had from the number of sales of previous entries, the number of player engagement with their communities, the positive and negative feedback from each game, etc. Hell, they even had data from the Mass Effect series that showed them very important details on what kinds of games their fanbase likes and what kinds of decisions not to do in a new installation of a franchise, such as what happened with Andromeda, for example. There is literally no excuse for the amount of dissonance present in Veilguard, and even less of an excuse for the dumbass comments that we just read in the last section. But anyway, moving on. In this section, I'll be using some leaked information provided by a playtester who spoke to Noor. I hope I pronounced that right. She's basically my neighbor, being from Spain, but this name itself doesn't sound very Latin, so I apologize in advance. I will not be using any clips from her interview, simply some information, so if you guys want to see the full interview for full context, check out her video. She's a small channel as well. I'll link it in the description. An important disclaimer in regards to the information is that it is all alleged, nor confirmed the man was a playtester, had signed an NDA, had an address for the studio, pictures of the parking lot and instructions on where to go to do the playtesting. But she still lays this out as a disclaimer anyway, because as a small channel she of course does not have extensive sources to back up everything with 100% certainty. But let's dig into the information first, and then we will continue with the other stuff that comes from the developers themselves. Here are the most relevant bullet points from the playtester. The woke elements are apparently very overt. Tash even introduces herself as a non-binary in that fantasy world. Solus is sidelined and made far less relevant than anyone coming from Inquisition would ever expect. By the way, this totally correlates with a name change from Dreadwolf into this Veilguard shit. The name Dreadwolf was actually very tied to Solus himself, and suddenly they just changed it to the Veilguard, whatever the fuck that means. Story was apparently disappointment after disappointment, choices do not carry over and decisions do not matter. This is something that was also confirmed by the developers themselves, although of course they use very flowery language instead, made to convince the players that it was done for them, because they didn't want to invalidate player choices. So they wanted to avoid contradictions. More bullshit. Because instead of invalidating nothing by doing what Witcher 3 did so beautifully, by letting us lay out our most important past decisions in a fitting interrogation sequence with the Nilfgaardian commander, and instead of invalidating some choices by at least validating others, what BioWare decided to do here is invalidate all choices by acknowledging nothing. The only thing they acknowledge and let you decide is whether or not you disbanded the Inquisition or kept it going at the end of the last game. And one more decision in regards to Solus, which is not going to be important anyway if he is sidelined. Next up from the playtester is that apparently Rook, the playable character, is a nobody. Just a dude in a bar, comically selected by Varric to be the new savior of Thedas. Segments of gameplay in the Fate were relegated to boring walking simulator with just fetch quests. Major characters such as Varric were sidelined as well, and the result is a game that feels incredibly removed from Origins, to the point where it's almost like it's in a completely different universe, which is also something that correlates to some of the information that we are going to get into in a second. These are the main points that I wanted to take away from the playtester's comments, because whether or not the rest of the stuff is true, and whether or not his personal interpretations of it are accurate, I prefer not to base my arguments on them, at least not to the point of making my video about it. These points, however, are actually pretty consistent with the footage that has been released, some developer commentary that has been published in gaming news sites, and of course, stupid comments and posts like the ones that we just saw in the previous topic, and a few others coming up in a bit. Several game series go through changes. This isn't a unique problem with Dragon Age Veilguard. The unique problem with Veilguard is that it didn't even want to be a Dragon Age game. It's the only explanation possible for the shit that we have seen. Because Veilguard completely detaches itself from everything. It's a far cry from Inquisition, it's a far cry from Dragon Age 2, and even a farther cry from Origins. Which is this important central point that the majority of the fanbase seems to be in agreement with in terms of what it is that the series should return to. Sure, they may not be in full agreement with everything that composes it, of course, but it's the perfect focus point for them to draw from and to use as a foundation or as a goal, while mixing and matching some successful elements from the other games and improving on the formula. Instead, Veilguard completely throws the formula into the trash and then uses the past games as examples to undermine in comparison to new directions and features that this new game contains. They do this so blatantly that it shows how little confidence they have for their own game and how little consideration they have for the franchise and the fanbase that they were handed to work on. So for example, in order to explain why Veilguard decided to go down this stupid road of linearity in what is meant to be an expansive RPG, they reframed Dragon Age Inquisition's semi-open world design as a problem. They even used the word hinterlands problem and described how this was some kind of big flaw with Inquisition that had the players getting exhausted from running around doing fetch quests in those open areas when all they wanted was to progress the story.
What the fuck does that mean?
What does this even mean? When this news first started making the rounds a few months ago, the comment sections were full of question marks, as people did not understand what the problem was at all. Sometime prior to this specific news coming out, there was another one expressing how Veilguard would not be a massive, tiring open world, and this was actually met with positive feedback, because if there is something that people are sick and tired of, it's vast empty worlds like the ones from Ubisoft. Then these hinterland problems articles start popping up and everyone is left scratching their fucking heads because it's not a big open world, but apparently it's not a small open area either, so what the fuck is it? Is it linear, or is it just another open world but they are trying to cover their ass by saying that it's not going to be a big empty one? We then soon discovered that it was actually just going to be a linear one instead, when the structure of Inquisition was actually a great middle ground. First of all, there was no hinterlands problem. The areas were semi-open, there wasn't vast empty stretches of land, there was plenty of incentive to explore and find treasure, hunt animals for pelts and mine rocks for materials, and fight some monsters along the way, all of which were useful for the crafting system, which was a welcome addition that even allowed people to change their equipment's colors with different materials. And if you just so happened to be a bit bored and you wanted to continue with the main story, then shit, go continue the main story. What kind of moron stays stuck doing shit that they don't want to do in a video game?
Question. Does that make me a dumbass?
Yes, she's retarded.
The incentive for exploration was there, the gameplay loop was satisfying and rewarding, and you had the freedom to do as much of it or as less of it as you wished. So again, where was the problem? This reeked of them simply trying to bash the previous game in order to present a questionable feature of their own new game in a positive light, basically a disingenuous attempt at the contrast principle effect. And what questionable feature is that? Well, how linear the game will be. This is the kind of thing that just doesn't fit Dragon Age as we know it. Linear environments don't lend themselves very well to fantasy RPGs, and it also has a huge level of dissonance with the free active combat system as well. We will see how this ends up mixing itself up in the end, but at the end of the day, it's always going to be much better to have an open area that you can explore and engage with the world in a much more meaningful way than just having this linear path to follow with very little to do, at least in this specific type of genre. Another example of this is how BioWare general manager told IGN how Veilguard will allow players to romance the companions they want.
Once again, respectfully, I say to myself, what the fuck does that mean?
You mean like every other fucking game with romance options ever? Like what the fuck does this even mean? Let us romance who we want? Every damn game with romance options has always allowed us to romance who we want. This is of course another argument undermining reality just to contrast it with their LGBTQIA2SPP poo-poo plus agenda of making every companion quote-unquote pansexual. There is another article out there somewhere, I'll try to find it while editing, where the previous games were described as player sexual, while Veilguard will instead be pansexual. Because eventually, if you don't pick any characters to romance, they will all end up fucking each other. This is supposed to be taken as a really great thing, but I don't understand why at all. This just further waters down all of the characters in the party. Never mind the argument for inclusion and representation, when in reality this game is just making everyone the fucking same. Speaking solely in regards to the characterization of our characters, this is not good. And it's even contradictory to the people that it is pandering to, because in the woke hive mind, sexual representation is so incredibly important, yet in this game, which prides itself as a home of sorts for, quote, queer players to know they are not alone, that they are brilliant and worthy, not only welcome but also celebrated. They make every character have the same bland sexuality of simply being open to being fucked by everyone.
Give me them big titty, give me them big titty, give me them big titty, give me them big titty. Girl, give me them big titty, 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 give me them big titty. Yeah, girl.
Their cheeks are ready for clapping no matter what you identify as. This is yet another reason for my bucket of why games and other media used to do this representation bullshit so much better when studios weren't populated by race, gender and sexuality obsessed activists who can't see past their own reflections. Say what you will of previous BioWare games, but at least these characters had character. Giving them preferences actually brought out more of their personalities without explicitly using words for it. Some characters were solely interested in men, other characters were solely interested in women. Some even had race preferences, like for example Solus was only interested in elven women, which was so apparent with what actually ended up being revealed in the end about himself. This was an additional layer to these characters' details. Taking it out and just making everyone want to bang each other just takes away from their complexity and realism as characters. And running to the game's media to use it as some sort of virtue signaling pandering to pansexuality is just cringe. And finally, another example, because why not, I'm feeling charitable today. These screenshots going by the screen right now show a couple of interactions between some fans or some shit and the writer of Dragon Age Veilguard. In them, he describes how certain types of magic and elements of the lore have been removed from use in Veilguard because they are inherently evil, and that is simply not the road that they want their hero to walk right now. And that the reason they don't want to have that kind of more nuanced experience is because they want for there to be a clear delineation between good and evil for clear storytelling. It's all in these screenshots, guys, feel free to pause. All of which is bullshit language for we are not going to be bothered with writing interesting compelling characters and stories, our heroes will all be incredibly fucking stale and one-dimensional, right alongside our incredibly stale and one-dimensional villains, and player choice will be completely watered down to be playing as a lame one-dimensional blank hero who only has one path, insofar as his demeanor and in the direction that the story goes. This is framed so pathetically. It's like, no guys, this isn't laziness, nor is it clear dissonance with what people want from a Dragon Age game. This isn't some disappointing thing. This is because here at BioWare we take pride in our consistency in storytelling, and so we are going to be removing these elements from gameplay and from player choice because they are clearly evil. These are only things that evil villains would do, and we want to keep those lines separated for clear storytelling. This directly correlates with some of the things said by that playtester, especially in regards to how disappointing the story is, how devoid of choice it is, how sidelined characters like Solus are, and how the protagonist is just a guy in a bar. I have no idea how this is the acceptable standard for a studio as big as BioWare from a company as big as EA to deliver in a long-awaited sequel in a multi-million-dollar franchise. This is an embarrassment. This is a Ubisoft mentality where instead of looking to improve their games or at least maintain the same level of quality, quantity and variety, it is instead all about how to do the least amount of work possible. Unveiling the Veilguard. So with all of that together, what's the result? What are we left with? Well, we're left with a terrible goofy-ass art style with gross smooth textures, dogshit character design that completely eliminates any and all notable characteristics of the races of Thetas. Everyone is reduced to just looking like a dolt. Look at this disgraceful Kunari design. Jesus, how the fuck do you go from this in Dragon Age 2 and this in Dragon Age Inquisition to this pile of garbage? These are just normal human faces with giant fucking foreheads and horns, all made worse by these terrible smooth textures, making everything look like a goddamn Saturday morning cartoon for children. Look at their bodies too. These are supposed to be the big imposing warriors that they were. They just look like humans but taller and gray and blue and shit. And look at the one on the bottom left here. Is that an Asian Kunari? Did we seriously need this? Did we seriously need real-life ethnic representation for the fucking Kunari? They are Kunari, for fuck's sake. They're not humans. Why are we... Why do I even bother asking? We already know why. It's fucking DEI mentality mixed with utter and complete talentless incompetence. The same exact thing is going on with elves and dwarves, of course. These races mean nothing in this stupid game. It's just human faces with human ethnic and racial diversity with big fucking ears. And in the case of dwarves, it's the same, but with the body size scaled down. Someone please tell me how is this acceptable? Someone please tell me how the supposed artists in charge of this slop are working at a studio of this size with the weight of the responsibility that comes with the delivery of a sequel to Dragon Age. How is this the best that EA and BioWare can do? Shit like this makes me genuinely wonder why does the AAA industry even bother to continue trying to take itself seriously anymore? And not just that, but also continues trying to convince all of us that $60 wasn't enough for a video game, and now $70 isn't enough for a game either, and we need to hike it up to $80 and beyond. And then they present us with shit like this. Again, contrast this with this, and then tell me to fucking pay more for Dragon Slop Shitguard instead of the $60 that I paid for Dragon Age Inquisition. Some of the character designs in recent memory have been so fucking terrible that I'm starting to seriously question the sanity of the people responsible for hiring these designers in the first place. Toxic positivity in these studios is real. It's killing all manner of fucking studios because people cannot speak up when they see something that looks like shit. Everybody just has to go with it. It is impossible for there not to have been one single person inside of BioWare who looked at these Kunari and went,
"Holy Jesus! What is that? What the fuck is that?"
But let's just continue with the rest of what we're left with. We're left with a character creator that calls itself inclusive while pandering to the lowest common denominator and excluding the vast majority of players, both in how they look in real life, completely incapable of representing themselves if they wish to, but also in the types of protagonists that both male and female gamers usually like to create in fantasy settings. A watered-down story with watered-down characters because the writers didn't want to bother writing compelling characters with depth, moral conundrums, and actually interesting plot points that would make the player think for themselves instead of just being spoon-fed how wonderfully morally perfect they are and how objectively evil the bad villains will be. A trivialization of player choice because the developers could not even bother developing an RPG that even remotely tries to stick to the values of Dragon Age as a franchise by putting player choice high on the list of priorities, specifically the choice to play as an asshole or even as an anti-hero of sorts. Again, draw your eyes towards the game director's developer diary page, especially in the section related to Dragon Age. In my previous video I criticized how Corrine uses this section about the game to go on a rant about identity politics and how she kept the part in regards to the actual game in very vague terms. Let's actually read it. In Dragon Age, you can be who you want to be, explore the possibilities and consequences of your choices, and build relationships that leave a lasting impression. Few games give players that kind of autonomy. Turns out that she couldn't even implement this into her damn sequel. As little and as vague as this is of a description of Dragon Age, in the Dragon Age section of her developer diary, she couldn't even fucking manage to fulfill that. And instead we have a game where we play as just some random moron in a bar who, despite whatever small decisions we can make here and there throughout the game, for example in IGN's preview, they mention how you can make a choice in which Harding gets hurt and then shows up in a few future cutscenes with her face all bruised up. Despite whatever small little nuggets of choice here and there, we will still be playing as a one-dimensional hero surrounded by other one-dimensional heroes. Kiss goodbye to any real renegade style of decisions or any story or side content that gets you to stop and think for yourself. It's just corporate-friendly slop in the name of clear storytelling, and overly quirky companions with dialogue that does not challenge their beliefs, dialogue that does not draw out their inner fucking complexities, because there are none. Let's keep going down the list of what we're left with. We have cakeloads of DEI injections via the character creator and apparently via the game itself, with even the very words of non-binary being used as an identity for a Kunari in a high dark fantasy setting that, well, supposedly should be far away from our reality, but it's really not. Thetis in Dragon Age Veilguard is shaping up to be modern day California, but with a few dragons, elves and dwarves that look like just fucking humans with ethnically diverse backgrounds, and these tall, dull looking soy fucks with horns. Those parts of the game where we go to places filled with darkspawn affected by the blight can just be basically San Francisco. Unserious Marvel-like writing for an unserious game that doesn't know what its own identity is, a combat system that doesn't fit its linear foundation, and a linear foundation that doesn't fit its RPG qualification, and a bunch of salty current and previous developers who will read your criticisms and dismiss them all as irrelevant bullshit, spewed by chuds, incels, coomers, and fucking tourists. Which brings us around to David Gaider and his comments towards what he perceives as the discourse around Dragon Age Veilguard. Now, my esteemed body type A's and body type B's, at the end of the day, this is the internet, and we know damn well that there's always going to be assholes, trolls, idiots, or just plain agitators that like to say provocative stuff. This has always existed and forever will. Again, it's the internet. But these disingenuous developers like to do two things. Number 1, pretend like it's completely impossible to figure out what the fandom wants because the fandom is a bunch of idiots who will hate on the new game while suddenly praising the previous game that they hated. If this was the case, nobody would ever be able to launch a successful franchise. This is just a bunch of grown-ass adults being deliberately obtuse about the fact that no matter how many stupid-ass comments you can sometimes read online, there is always going to be a clear inclination from bigger groups, perhaps even the majority, of your fandom giving you insight on what's being done correctly, what could use improving, what could use fixing, and what was so abysmally stupid that should definitely not be pursued in the future. The problem is that this toxic positivity culture that they created for themselves and ushered into their studios makes them look at all criticism as negativity to be ignored. This playtester even claimed that most of his feedback would not even get passed on to the team because of it touching on sensitive negative things such as complaining about quote-unquote woke stuff. The reason why I bring this up, fully knowing that someone can just tell me that it's alleged, is because we have seen Ubisoft insiders report the same to Legendary drops, and we have also seen Concord insiders reporting the same to Colin Moriarty. This is happening, folks, and it's also perfectly visible by the comments from these developers. They are salty as fuck. They are blinded by politically brained rage. They see criticism and reframe it as whatever the fuck they need in order to cope. And then they keep making their shitty games that not even they want to play. More on this in just a little bit. They sit here acting like victims of a curse that is only unique to BioWare. While I agree that, thanks to the tumultuous nature of BioWare's inability to establish a solid identity for itself, there are more voices pushing in various different directions, such as original voices pushing towards Origins, fans of Dragon Age 2 pushing towards Dragon Age 2, and fans from Inquisition pushing towards Inquisition. At the end of the day, this is a problem that they created for themselves, and even if there was more confusion as to which of these voices they should focus more on, there was absolutely no confusion whatsoever as to the fact that straying away from Origins and Inquisition was a terrible idea. And yet, that's what this new BioWare team did, and it's still what even some of these older devs defend by pushing this narrative of the fandom being a bunch of idiots who don't know what they want, or tourists who don't belong, or all of these other nice insults that we love so much and that totally drive up their sales expectations. So that was number 1. Number 2, they completely disregard all of the core criticisms being made about this game and water it all down to this. Females aren't hot enough, yet because they've clued into the notion that this is obviously incel behavior, they swapped out unattractive for masculine and thus transgender, because that's a framing which makes them seem political instead of porn-brained, but we all know what they mean. Yes, I'm sure David Gaider would know all about what incel behavior looks like, and all about what porn-brain behavior looks like as well. After all, here we are pointing out all of these issues, but all that this retard seems to grasp onto is females not being hot enough, which is a total fallacy on its own. Feel free to check out my video on this topic right here. He carries on with his antics, talking about how some dude whined about Cassandra 10 years ago because she had a big jaw and blah 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 blah, more references to porn-brain behavior, no arguments whatsoever, and fully admitting, albeit by accident of course, that this is a non-issue, a memory of a single dude who complained about Cassandra. Apparently this guy, if he even exists, has been living rent-free in David's mind for 10 years. And now, instead of addressing the real criticism, he pulls this shit out of his ass to try and divert the attention from the actual point. Points which he will so deliciously acknowledge in the worst way possible in just a bit. This one here is just more nonsense. If you guys want to pause and read, go ahead. It's just him attacking Grums because he got mad at his actions of reducing every goddamn person complaining about Veilguard to racist chuds and incels. All these people complaining, by the way, they are a very fucking diverse community. I have seen men, women, non-binary people, and even trans people in my comment sections from previous videos alone. And this is me, a fucking shrimp of a YouTuber who had like 800 subscribers when I made that first video. All these people, according to David here, are racist incel chuds who got mad at David's big brain move of calling out their bluff of just having flaccid PPs when looking at Veilguard's characters. I swear, man, the depth at which you have to be so far up inside your own ass, so deep inside your echo chamber of copium to generalize everyone criticizing this game into this is insane. Over here we have David once again doing the same thing and putting his utter fucking ignorance on full display, calling tourists to the usual suspects, upset at how woke the new Dragon Age is, mocking and dismissing the thought as ridiculous because of how obviously and consistently woke the series has apparently always been. This is that classic strawman bullshit. Veilguard has taken such a massive leap in terms of what one would consider woke elements that it is impossible not to acknowledge the stark difference. In the previous games, all you really had was gay and bi characters whom you could romance, and in Inquisition they also shoved in a trans character into Iron Bull's mercenary company. He's got a couple of dialogues and that's it. Contrast that with all the bullshit we've seen so far, without the game even being out yet, like the pronoun selection, the non-binary gender, the completely out-of-place top surgery scars that don't even make sense in-universe, the Kunari that introduces herself as non-binary, the appraisal of all the pansexual cast, the utter lack of possibility to create a brawny masculine character or a curvy female character, the entire fucking developer diary from the game director going off into identity politics and queer this, queer that, in the section dedicated to what Dragon Age is supposed to be. These people are the ones who injected political ideology into the discourse surrounding the game first, with all of this nonsense, including the character creator who they called inclusive. But that is anything but, because inclusion means an addition, and what this character creator did was a removal of what they didn't find politically appealing and exclusively pandering to their 1% of modern audience bullshit. So if they added the politics into it, now it's our fault for using a political lens to talk about it? If wokeness is all that Dragon Age has ever meant to this dumb fuck, then he's the fucking tourist around here. This one here is just more of the same, pretending like there is only one type of criticism and that it's all irrelevant. Dipshit number 1 says it's also the same people who said they gave up on BioWare over a decade ago, and yet they sure have stuck around to complain. I would simply move on with my life to things that bring me joy. Oh, is it the same people? Well shit, I must have forgotten to sign the form then, my bad. Dipshit number 2, aka David Gaider, says if they gave up on BioWare a decade ago, or more for those of whom their Dragon Age Origins was the last good game, then they never were going to buy the game anyhow. At which point, why should BioWare listen to them? Abandon your fanbase and woo us instead? Okay, sure Jan. If there ever is a zombie apocalypse of some kind, this man is going to be safe as houses, let me tell you something. Someone please never put this man ahead of a company or anything else. He's going to fucking tank it before 3 o'clock. See what I mean, guys? If they had people dropping interest over a decade ago after Dragon Age Origins, then what fucking retarded mentality is this? Instead of targeting the problems, they just let them fester and kept this attitude going.
They were never going to buy the game anyhow.
So what's the fucking solution then, David? Keep making the games worse? Keep going down the road of proven bad decisions? Just because...
fuck them, they're not going to buy it anyway.
Oh my god, someone on my last video on defeminization said that I shouldn't call people retarded so often. But like, what other word can we even use for situations like these? The lack of sense is staggering.
Why should BioWare listen to them? Abandon your fanbase and woo us instead?
Because they are the fanbase, because without them, what the hell do you even have left? You pushed away the Dragon Age Origins people, you pushed away the Dragon Age 2 people, you pushed away the Dragon Age Inquisition people. Fuck, outside of Dragon Age franchise, you also pushed away the Mass Effect people, and any chance that you had of gaining new people through Anthem was completely squandered. At some point, they stopped ignoring the trolls and started ignoring everyone, ending up alienating and now even insulting their fanbase. Good fucking job. This company has been taking L after L after L, and they are on the precipice of being axed by EA or shoved off to the side to work on other garbage like The Sims. If there was ever a time to fucking listen to the fans, this was it. Who the fuck are they going to woo here? They pushed away everyone, and now with these kinds of comments, they make it even worse by demonizing them, dismissing them, trivializing the feedback, the criticism, and the concerns that they've been voicing in God knows how many fucking years. Even I, who was considering to buy this damn game purely for content purposes, feel turned away now because of reading garbage like this from garbage people with no reason to speak like this to their fans. People with no principles whatsoever. Who are they going to woo when they can't even woo themselves? Here is David Gaider admitting that even he isn't going to be playing this pile of garbage of a game himself. All this talk, all this grandstanding, all these malicious misinterpretations of criticism, all these insults towards the fanbase that refuses to consume slop. And then he himself admits that he doesn't like the art style. He himself has criticisms of this shit, of the modernization of the gameplay, of the dumb decisions to cut out player choices from previous games. He has got no intention of playing it whatsoever. Oh sure, he masks it all with this bullshit language, but on this channel we pride ourselves with seeing right through it. At the end of the day, a gamer is a gamer, and all a gamer wants most is to play a good-ass game, one in which they can have a blast from start to finish with a good story, good characters, good gameplay, etc. If this guy was genuinely interested in it, if this guy was actually serious and genuine about all the dog shit that he just said in defense of this game, and all of the rest that he just said here about how he sees so much stuff in which he loves, then he would 100% play it, because this is that inherent excitement that we can all relate with. We know how it feels to be truly excited and confident for a new game. We know how it feels to count the weeks and then the days until it arrives. We know how it feels to even place that order in the first place and not even care about the price, because goddammit, we know how worth it the experience is going to be. We know how all of this feels, and we know that we can't wait to actually put that disc into the console or, download it onto our PC, whatever it is, and press play. Look at all his language, look at his supposed excitement about going to all these places he once dreamed of, and to finally see them all in their glory, and how cool that is, and how he's got every confidence in Patrick and the writers to enthrall the fans and provide a worthy next chapter. Not a single doubt on that front. Well, why isn't he fucking playing it then? Why isn't he endorsing this with every same hair on his chest that he used to insult the fucking fanbase with? Because at the end of the day, David isn't interested in this in the slightest. At the end of the day, he sees what we see, but he is so indoctrinated into politicizing everything and in his appearance as a good righteous cuck that he can't even stand to criticize this game. He can't stand to call this game for what it is. Ugly. Ugly in the character design, which he says in his own words. Ugly in the presentation. Ugly in the UI. Ugly in the textures. Ugly in the art style. Ugly in its colors. Just fucking ugly and bland and a complete shadow of itself, a total night and day difference from what Dragon Age should have evolved to become. This looks so bad to this man that he can't even take a single evening to play the damn thing, but he is more than willing to insult anyone who dares to say the same things that he just said, but without the bullshit corporate toxic positivity filter. So at the end of the day, if not even this guy finds a reason to play it, why should we? But anyway, that's it for me today, guys. Outside of potentially following up on answering some comments, this will be my last video on the Veilguard matter, at least for a while, unless I end up going with the idea of getting it for making videos. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you did, it really helps me out, and as always, I'll be hanging around in the comments. Feel free to share your thoughts or feedback, anything is welcome. Thank you very much for watching, have a great day, and I'll see you on the next one.